in short and concise way, and then we can wrap up the kind of conversation of if there's any type of tools or gaps that, that you're aware of that really are affecting the impact you and your organizations can have when it comes to business integrity. So I think without much further ado, we'll kick it off, and I'm really happy to introduce Elia Thipe from GIZ here locally in South Africa. He's a senior technical advisor for business integrity. He's part of the Transparency, Integrity and Accountability program that I think some of you will most likely know. And he has been appointed as an implementation partner to support the government's national anti-corruption strategy, which does include collective action when it comes to engaging the private sector. In support of this, he's responsible for establishing a multi-stakeholder partnership for business integrity that will really aim to kind of develop tools and instruments specifically for SMEs to improve their overall integrity and ethical standards. So we're really looking forward, Elias, to hear more from you about your approach when it comes to that, and also sort of the tools that have been developed through collective action for potential collective action here in South Africa.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I wanted to talk about something a little bit controversial, and I was called to order. Locally, we refer to these sessions as graveyard sessions, but I'm told that prior to the graveyard session, there's a mortuary. So thank you so much for the opportunity again. As Scarlet said, my name is Elia from Thipe, Transparency, Integrity and Accountability Program from a company called GIZ. We focus mainly on the implementation of the National Anti-Corruption Strategy. From the government side, our lead partner is the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation. So they hold us accountable to ensure that whatever we do, we really support the National Anti-Corruption Strategy. A little bit of background from the program itself. I'm not going to talk too much about the first two outputs. For the purpose of today, I'm looking at output 3, but just for the general knowledge purposes, the program itself has got 3 outputs. The first one is focused on mobilizing active citizenry. I think in the first 2 sessions, as a theme, it came out quite strongly that as a country at large, and as us in forums like this, we really need to take active citizenry into account. The second one is the capacity building of the state, specifically in government. So this output is looking at capacitating the states, especially those institutions that, whose objectives are really to ensure that, among other things, the recommendations of the Zondo commissions are put in place, the establishment of National Anti-Corruption Agency, and then, of course, the strategy itself in broader terms. Output 3, which is more relevant to where I am today, is to establish multi-stakeholder partnerships. There's 3 of them. The first one is whistleblowing. I think we've heard so much about it, and there's so much to talk about. There's a multi-stakeholder partnership that specifically looks at whistleblowing. Cynthia is quite active in that, and some of the people in the room are active in that. The second one is open public procurement. It's also equally important because we all know that we can't really separate business integrity from procurement. And as far as the state is concerned, that's where a whole lot of corruption and corrupt activities get reported in the media. So in line with the theme for today, collective action, ours is to mobilize private sector, work with them to develop tools that will enhance the program or enrich the program to ensure that the strategy is implemented, and develop specific tangible tools. I said earlier on, I don't want to be controversial, but I also want to say in sessions of this nature, at least in South Africa, without any qualification, there is fatigue of talk. There is fatigue of breakfast sessions. I think ours today is not one of those. But the reason I'm emphasizing it is when we talk casually and formally, there is a sense that when we talk about multi-stakeholders, what are those forums doing? So one of the things is to develop tangible tools that I would like to share 2 of those this afternoon. A little bit about Alliance for Integrity. It's a multi-stakeholder on its own, even though it's an internationally based company. It's based in Germany. It has got presence at least in 59 countries. It's a multi-stakeholder partnership on its own that focuses on the following: the private sector organization, more specifically on the development of small, medium enterprises. And the reason I said in one of the sessions earlier on that in our country, at least, that's where the gap is to make sure that, at least from the very beginning, we conduct our businesses ethically. And the example I made was some of the SMMEs are saying, I want to be to compete equally in the supply chain values of major companies, but I find myself having to bribe someone to get that contract. You know, and one would say, I don't get those contracts because I'm told I do not comply. But why do I not comply? I don't know the importance of my tax affairs, for example. I don't know why I don't comply. So that's an opportunity there. Alliance is also an international organization, like I said, but it has got other partners, Global Compact, OECD, and a whole lot of them that are, in a way, driving the whole collective action through different multi-stakeholder partnerships in different countries based on the unique needs of those countries. Government institutions, I refer to those that are responsible for implementing the National Anti-Corruption Strategy, but we also have existing institutions that have always been there, and agencies, your SIU, the security states, and all of that. Once again, through engagements, there is a sense that, you know, documents are there, strategies are there, we just don't implement. So how we get measured in the multi-stakeholder partnerships is to produce tangibles as opposed to just documents. And there's always an argument to say you can produce some guidelines, but the emphasis here is do something that business can benefit from, SMEs can benefit from, citizens can benefit from, and civil organizations. And lastly, the last 2 ones I refer to civil society. We also work with academia on specific areas, whether it's training, whether it's research, whether it's sharing best practice and all of that. Now, the services that the Alliance of Integrity offers is peer-to-peer learning. Like I said, there's so much benefit that one can learn through peer-to-peer exchanges. One of which is, now and again we hear in the private sector that we are sorted as far as anti-corruption is concerned. We have our hotline in place. We have our ethics standards. But through these exchanges, one can see an opportunity to even enrich and enhance your own strategy in general terms, just by sharing information. Public-private dialogues, those of you who are aware that I think Gautrain is one of those examples where prior to it being a successful project, there was a dialogue first. And that dialogue was in a session like this. So I'm just emphasizing the benefits of different people coming together up to a point where there is a product that one can look back and say, we are proud and we delivered the service. So a dialogue is important. Awareness raising, I would like to demonstrate this one with just an example. I have a colleague of mine that is based in Ghana. They develop what they call a no excuse guide. It's a simple to read. I will share the links a little later. But when one looks at the top 10 excuses why people behave and act in a corrupt manner, it's things that sound lousy. But the more and more you talk about them, and I'll give you an example. Someone was dismissed working for a Department of Transport in one of the countries. We all know there's always a backlog around getting a driver's license and all of that. So they asked this person, why did you accept the bribe, And the answer was that my boss is not worried about it. And he or she knows it happens. I saw it from my uncle. So there is nothing wrong in being corrupt. I grew up. This other one said they bought me a TV. And now you can just imagine now you lose your employment and your career that you work so much for because of a TV. So that awareness about ethics is quite important. And then of course we've got a toolbox on gender and anti-corruption. You might be aware there's a whole lot of discussions around sextortion, sexual crimes and all of that. I'm not going to go too deep into that, but it's one of the services that we offer awareness and training in. The last two really I want to spend time on is the training program and our digital tools. Now, I'm talking about digital tools, and my tool is disappointing me now. For some reason, I don't know whether the battery is dead, but I'm also kind of old school. I can probably read my notes here. Oh, there it is. So we've got the Train the Trainer program, and I was listening with interest the session that we're in, that Chris and the colleagues from the Ethics Institute shared with us as far as training is concerned. We all do different things, and we all call it training. And it's in sessions like this that we must begin to not duplicate efforts, begin to talk more. Sometimes we talk different things to the same audience, and we all call it training. So this specific one really is a Train the Trainer program that is targeted at SMEs, obviously in the private sector. It's the material itself was developed by different countries. Of course, the convergence of it was by Alliance for Integrity, but it really focuses on compliance. So we train the trainers kind of from a multiplier effect so that they are able to go and train others on ethics, on things like differentiating between anti-corruption and being ethical. Sometimes we use both words loosely, but they are quite different. So the Train the Trainer program is really to train those that will train others. Ideally, it will be those that are already your typical compliance officers that are already aware of the dynamics in the country. They are already aware of the business landscape. They've already identified other training gaps as far as there is concerned. So that's just a program on its own. We also, 80% of it, we're targeting SMEs, like I said earlier on, that they do indeed need training, and also language. What I forgot to mention is that the Train the Trainer is also offered in at least 5 different languages. And the reason we did that, we realized that it's easy for us to have a conversation in English, but to build that relationship and to ensure that we kind of start to change the behaviors and influence them, it becomes easier if it becomes in different languages, especially those natives. And the content itself is corruption preventative training. So we don't so much talk about investigations. We're trying to kind of sell what can be done to prevent corruption, as opposed to those consequences of having to react after it has happened. And then, of course, lastly, we've got a support desk that really helps these trainers, among other things, to adapt the material, to make sure that it's relevant to the local challenges. I think also through COVID, we learned that we can do training virtually, especially because the alliance is spread across, and we're really trying to establish a physical presence in South Africa. So the support desk is really there to support the trainers once they've gone through the train the trainer, and those compliance officers in private companies have also gone through. They enjoy that level of support as well. I now want to talk about the integrity app itself. I really would have loved to demonstrate it, but in the interest of time, I'll share the link a little bit later, but it's very easy if you go into it. But this really helps SMEs, number one, to assess where they are as far as ethics is concerned. It's through a questionnaire that, based on your responses, it identifies areas that you need to work on. That's one part. The second part, it also helps organize the authentication process from a data protection perspective. But there are podcasts and videos that one can access readily available. A step-by-step guideline for those startups as well, to get to understand what is compliance and to start compliance programs. It's quite comfortable for us to get to understand that, but for someone who's still new in the business environment, it can be heart-rendering sometimes. The capacity building on its own, it's enhanced by the fact that we are a network, and that peer-to-peer learning, we bring it up into the app itself, so that we gather as much information as possible. Nothing really beats best practice. And best practice most of the time comes from when you least expect it. And where you least expect it is from someone that you don't know. So I have met so many other people today here that one can learn from, not necessarily the speakers, but even when we're having lunch out there, one can hear that, this is probably an area to focus on. And I mentioned the fact that it's freely accessible. And then, just like any, and I don't want to call it an audit tool, but it gives an opportunity to reevaluate now and again on a regular basis where you are. This is the link that I referred to earlier on. We can always share it, and this is really how you access it. Like I said, I would have loved to do it, but of course, in the interest of time, we can always do it at a later stage. Key steps. Yeah.
Just in the interest of time.
Yes. I was just about to say that normally the program directors are jealousy. But anyway, the first step is the commitment from leadership. I think in the two panel discussions, it came out quite strongly. The role of ethical leadership and not just leadership. An evaluation carried out to understand an institution's corruption risk. So all these steps follow each other up to a point where the app itself gives you areas where you need to improve, risks, as well as recommendations, as well as examples of possible actions to take. Regular reporting on corruption measures, I referred to that earlier on. It is also important to measure the impact of existing compliance. So we are saying, we're not suggesting whatever you have in place can be discarded, but re-evaluate it and use the app to identify areas where you can improve. Lastly, there is a collective action. I think we spoke a lot about it today, not only as a theme, but the app itself has got databases and some case studies of other success stories from different parts of the world that one can have a look at and adapt to suit the local situation. Lastly, this is just the statistical information. We've got about 8,600 users registered on the tool itself, and 3,000 companies, self-assessment 2,600, 432 risk assessments, and it's available so far. The uptake of it is in 59 countries. On that note, thank you very much. If there are any questions, I hope they are easy.
Thank you. Thank you, Elias. And from, I think, one app to the next, we'll move on to Samuel Ngoni, who is the co-founder of the Citizens WatchApp and an accountant who specializes in financial reporting and audits. He's very passionate about financial crime investigations and actively involved with the Anti-Human Trafficking Intelligence Initiative. And his mission is really to drive sort of like nonprofit networks addressing financial crime there. And I think it's an interesting switch from some of the discussions we've had, because sometimes, it can sound like we're talking about companies as if it's not people in those companies. So I think it's just bringing it back to people working in the companies as citizens and citizen empowerment and what tools are out there. So happy to hand over to you to tell us a bit more about your app and how you're rolling that out in multiple countries in the region.
Okay. Thank you very much. And thank you to all we are here. I hope you are going to listen attentively because this is going to help you. Okay, just to start up, some of the slides I will just have to talk through. So just to give you a background, Citizen WatchApp, it was actually brought up from hair corruption that happened last year that was actually financed by Accountability Lab. So from there, we are a group of 6. 4, it's women empowered, so women are heavily presented there. 4 women and 2 men. So this app, it is actually meant to equip citizens with facilities that can actually help them report corruption to authorities, because from the discussion that we have had earlier, we had people having to take up corruption on Facebook, Twitter, and the like. Then they end up being told you are more like a sellout and the other stuff. So this app, we are trying to actually tell citizens, like, you know what, you can upload it onto this app. Then it can then be sent through the proper channels that they really want. So I'll move on to the next slide. And also onto this, it's actually, for now, it's actually being developed for Zambia, but we intend to move to Kenya and then Namibia. Then if all things go well, we'll actually move into other countries. So having said that, the main objectives is actually it's actually about integrating available data sources, because data sources, they are there. If you ask the governments out there, they'll tell you, like, you know what, you're telling us to be transparent, but we do have websites where you can go and get your data. You can go and get to see your tenders. You can go and get to see who are the owners and stuff. So we are saying we want to actually have an integrated approach. We want to merge, not to merge rather, but to synchronize the information that is coming from the tender and link it to the owners, the beneficial owners of those people who are actually bidding for that tender and stuff. And besides, after having done that, the other objective is actually to provide analytical tools, because once we have done that, because the more data we have from various sources, the more we actually can actually be able to investigate corruption, and we can actually then stop corruption in some way. Because this is meant for the entire citizens, that is coming from the general person who's walking from the street, up until to a journalist, up until to CSOs that are here, NGOs that are here, whoever is interested in knowing about what is happening with government tenders. Then what will this application do, right? Our intention is to actually have live data collection that we are extracting from, especially like now we're specializing with Zambia. We've got the ZPPA and the other one, I'll talk about it more in the next slides. So we want to actually have live data collection from their websites, so that then we get them onto our system, then we can actually get to analyze. It gets analyzed. It's actually up to the user if you want to analyze the information, because some people can analyze the information, some can't, some can take photos and stuff. So we want to simplify the data and information to citizens, because yes, we can see there are 20 tenders, but what does it mean? Who won the tender? How did they win the tender, and the like? So we are trying to simplify the data for the general public. And we are actually wanting to make sure that there's public scrutiny, analysis, and monitoring that I've said about it. All this is actually meant to promote transparency and accountability. And also, sometimes citizens feel that there is no relationship between them and the government. It's more like a war, that they always think those people in power, that they do their own things. So this app, we are trying to integrate them to okay, the citizens are saying this. What are you, the authorities, saying? Then we can actually then draw a conclusion from that. Then I'll move on to the next. So the benefits that I'll come up to this, some of them I've just said them: increased accountability and transparency, empowering citizens with the knowledge of how to actually analyze tenders and we want to reduce incidents of corruption, because we think that by actually displaying this information, by analyzing it, somehow prevents those ones who actually want to engage in corrupt activities to know that, you know what, if this happens, there is an app that each and anyone can actually be able to take a photo. Because take, for instance, in South Africa, there was an incident of a stadium whereby there was a 15 million stadium, but it all came up because of photos and stuff, whereby they were saying that they are building a 15 million stadium, but to some it's not worth 15 million. Yes, and besides, another example also was a photo that showed more like a government tender that had been won. That one was in Zimbabwe, whereby a company had got a tender of supplying computers that were worth $9,000 per computer. It was actually through a photo. So it means that there were processes that went through, internal audit went through, all the stuff, but they just didn't want to see it. But the moment it went out of the cloud, out into the public, the Ministry of Finance now had to come out and say, okay, we are now stopping this. So we want citizens to, if they see something, take a photo of it, then if they can upload it onto our system. But it will be their system. Sorry to say our system. And then you can visit our website. It's still being developed, so you continue to see changes happen there because we are still in the development phases. So then, yes, so some actually, like, you know what, you're saying all this, but is it really practical? So I'll tell you, we started last year, and I think we are 8 months down the line. So far, we have actually have MOUs with Transparency International Zambia, because for us to just come up and just say, to go to the government and say, we want this information and stuff, we needed a person with a voice. We needed a group with a voice that could actually walk to the government and say, you know what, this is an initiative that we want to actually implement. So Transparency International Zambia is currently assisting us with the government authorities, because we want to have, the other challenge that we are having is a common data model, because in instances you might find the other data is available in PDF, the other one is in Excel, the other was in Microsoft. So with our system, we want to integrate, we want to have a common data model that we can then use to simplify and give feedback. So for the procurement data, we've got the ZPPA, that is the Zambia Public Procurement Authority. We are already engaged with them in terms of having an MOU, same as with PACRA, that is responsible for the company's registration and stuff. There are already talks that are there. In some of them, they've one of the organizations has actually agreed to give us the data, but the format that we are going to get the data and stuff, that is it's technical maybe for most of you. I wouldn't want to go into detail with it, but in due course you will get, because you want the finished product. That's more that we're interested in. So it's going to be easy to access because it will be just a matter of you download the app, you choose the relevant category that you want and stuff. Then for easier purposes, because sometimes you might see every day as we walk, even from walking here up until to Houtron Station, maybe there was a contractor that was given to make sure about the road and stuff. Maybe it wasn't done properly and stuff. You can just quickly, what we want is more to do with the geolocation, tender. If you know the tender number, you put the tender number, then you put your photo or you put your details that is there, then you send, then you submit the report. That is what our intention is. So then, in conclusion, I think most of it I've talked about it. I don't want to waste much of your time. But all this that we are trying to do, we are still amateurs in this. We just started this, and we would really accept input from all or few players that are inside this room who can actually help us to actually make this tool effective, because we have realized that, yes, the government are working in silos, but so is also the anti-corruption bodies and anti-corruption people who also want to actually investigate corruption. And those who do, they work alone, like my sister who's there. So we need the collaborations that we can actually help to make this program success. So first of all, no questions, please. Just advice, just advice. Thank you.
Thank you, Samuel. And I think this actually connects quite nicely to what was being discussed in the previous panel on whistleblowing, where I think the question was asked a couple of times: where do we report? How do we blow the whistle? Where do we put information? And it looks like a really great potential, maybe also for the region, to develop it. And it's great to hear that you're interested to get feedback from the people doing when it comes to engaging with the private sector, trying to address corruption. And we felt quite strongly that that information was literally nowhere to be found. And I think this was one of those experiences of saying, okay, well, we'll start that process of capturing what was being said there, but that was really just the starting point, and we're hoping that this is something that can be developed beyond just obviously the government engagement and opportunities to be able to capture the lessons learned, the different approaches in the region. I've been asked a couple of times, well, what is working, what isn't working here, where is that information? So we're very much at the starting point, but I think it's obviously great to be here with all of you. And I think I'm just going to hand over to my colleague Liza, who's been working on this and writing this guide about what can we learn, what can we capture, and what can we build on when it comes to corruption prevention and the role of government when it comes to engaging with the private sector. So over to you, Liza.
Thank you so much, Scarlett. Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. So I'm going to be very quick because I don't want to take too much of your time, and I know it's been a very long day, and especially when we've been called the graveyard panel. So I'm going to keep it fairly short. So as Scarlett said, and just say we wrote it together. So, so this practical guide is aimed for national anti-corruption agencies in Africa, and also aims to capture and explore innovative approaches to corruption prevention in the continent, and also to help and inspire national anti-corruption agencies engage with the private sector more efficiently. And what we have noticed and what we want to highlight is that Africa offers many examples of innovative, unique, and context-sensitive approaches to fighting corruption and preventing corruption. So we just wanted to highlight 3 general trends that we have identified. So the first trend is that many national anti-corruption agencies work with the private sector, raise awareness and guide through training and through offering tailored guidance on national, international, and regional anti-corruption regulations, but also by setting up events and sustained dialogue platforms that focus on the private sector, and also by giving the private sector an important role in the development and implementation phase of the national anti-corruption strategies. So Samuel talked about the ZPPA, so thank you for introducing the Zambia's Public Procurement Authority, and we just wanted to highlight this example because the ZPPA has been offering workshops for companies to better address corruption risks when bidding for a public tender. Another trend that we wanted to highlight and that we have identified is that many national anti-corruption agencies support and incentivize the private sector to engage in corruption prevention activities and initiatives, which is quite innovative. And they do so by shifting the name and shame approach to a name and praise approach, which is again quite innovative in this field. And they also do so by creating and developing tangible business benefits for companies investing in compliance, and by supporting and acknowledging compliance certification initiatives. We're not going to go too much into details into certification, because there was a breakout session about that. But we just wanted to highlight the Nigeria's corporate governance rating system that Soji presented this morning. Also the Ivorian Anti-Corruption and Good Governance Awards for companies. And a third one is the Mauritius scorecards for listed companies which comply with the Code of Corporate Governance. And in terms of incentivizing the private sector, we also wanted to underline Ghana and Morocco, who are looking into providing tax cuts and favorable rates for companies who comply with anti-corruption regulations. And a third trend that we have identified is that many governments in Africa demonstrate leadership by becoming an active participant in collective action initiatives. And of course, three successful examples are Cost Malawi, that Joe presented earlier, the Fisheries Transparency Initiative, and the Maritime Anti-Corruption Network, that we haven't talked about today, but which is a very successful example, and that Soji is leading in Nigeria. Also, because I missed the point there, national anti-corruption agencies have also been developing and implementing integrity tools to address corruption in high-risk sectors, and promoting integrity pacts, and also the implementation of a high-level reporting mechanism. So that's the HRM, but we can talk about it a bit later. So that's the map that we have filled in, but please help us fill in the map with examples of from your country, and even if your country is already colored, I'm sure we haven't captured all of the examples from your government engaging with the private sector. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you, Liza. And maybe just to very quickly add on that, as you might imagine, generally speaking, it's the training aspect is very strong. Anti-corruption agencies are very happy to train. We do see that the training that is focused on specific risks or specific industries is much more impactful. Many of them are sort of like more in the area of trying to generally uplift the standards in the business industries, but we definitely see a shift to being more aware of the actual risks and then addressing that, and also becoming more of in certain environments, more of a sort of, especially the prevention side of the anti-corruption agencies, a support function where companies can also come to and raise concerns and sort of be included and be part of the table. When it comes to incentives, this is something that more could be done. So this is sort of like capturing the starting and something that we're obviously very much sort of pushing for. I think it's very interesting to see that there's discussion around tax benefits, so very tangible benefits, but the conversations that we have back and forth is if there's tangible business benefits, there have to be clear commitments and accountability, and so it's a question of how that is being set up. But yeah, just to say this is very much a start, and we're looking to kind of continue to develop that here. I just wanted to quickly wrap it up in terms of a tool that is actually looking at conceptualizing and developing collective action. We started developing a 3-part course through our Basel Learn platform, where there's a lot of freely available learning tools for different stakeholders available. And we always used to say, well, there is no blueprint for collective action, because actually this is something that has to be context sensitive, that has to be owned by the stakeholders and developed by the stakeholders to reflect their needs. But what we have seen over the years is that there's a couple of general questions that tend to come up all the time. So what we try to do here is to sort of start developing a course, and we finished the first module out of 3 modules, which will help and support anybody who's interested in developing these type of initiatives to start the process of developing your own concept of collective action and sort of roadmap through a guided course. So what we do is, of course, we go through the basics. The good thing about collective action is the theory is very simple. It becomes more complicated when you try to implement it. So we go through the theory fairly quickly. We test the theory and ask people to test and participants to test it based on their experiences as well. So testing the theory through interactive, whether it's games or different sort of like test modules. And we have here, Liza just mentioned the Maritime Anti-Corruption Network, then really taking sort of the descriptions against the way, the theory, and seeing, whether that makes sense. And also, of course, they're being able to already bring some case studies of successful initiatives in for participants to think about. We then decided to ultimately develop a new, semi-new country, Wakanda. We did add an extra A to not get sued, which is not a real country, but for all 3 courses will be sort of the environment that is built up, where we introduce different stakeholders and talk people through what it could look like trying to develop a collective action in that environment. As you can see here, as we basically have a couple of different stakeholders, whether it's the donors, civil society, or a young entrepreneur here in an environment. And there's actually sort of different interview styles included, but a summary here of how they describe the environment, and then the way to kind of look at what are some of the opportunities, but also hurdles when you're trying to develop an initiative in that context. We're also looking at other stakeholders and giving some input of whether it makes sense at the beginning of an initiative or further on to kind of connect with other stakeholders. Yes, and then based on that process, there's a whole list of ideas scribbled down, and then there's a sort of guided process of trying to develop that into a bit of a starting point concept for Wakanda. And then that is translated into an opportunity, guided opportunity to start thinking about that in your own context. And in the second module, you were able to then send this to yourself, but also to members of the Basel Institute if you would like to get feedback. So it's not just an online course. There's the opportunity to kind of have that interaction and build on that in the second and third course. And then we are also, in terms of the support we can give, is help organizations then start the process of implementing that. But we have found that there's a lot of work, groundwork for us to do often, which resembles the same kind of conversations, and we really felt like it was a good idea to capture that in a training that's freely available, that still has a personal contact point to kind of build that. And we're really hoping that that's something that's not only interesting for private sector, but also civil society and government. And throughout the 3 courses, you will be asked to basically step into a different stakeholder role, because we do also see that it's typically private sector find it difficult to take on the perspective of government. Same with civil society. So we're really also trying to already facilitate that. So that's in a very short nutshell the first module of our collective action course. The second and third one will be finalized by end of summer, hopefully, and will be available. We're happy to share links to that as well to everybody. And just to say, this is also something that can be, and we're potentially looking into tailoring more to different environments, keeping sort of the basics and then being able to tailor it either to different stakeholder needs or also different contexts. So that is pretty much, I think, it from our side in terms of collective action tools. I think before we go into any questions, I think it would be really nice to give a quick opportunity for our facilitators from session 1 and 2 to come in and just give us a really, really brief overview of what was being discussed in those sessions, and then we'll open it up to any final questions as well. So over to you, Celia.
Thank you, Scarlet. Can we get those slides up, please? We're just going to give you a quick overview of who was in the room. You can go to the next slide. So in session 1, we focused on specific anti-corruption content that's available in the market. And we had, as you can see, private sector, CSOs and international organizations present in the room. Next slide, please. We also asked, what does collective action mean to you? And this kind of underscored and underlined what was said this morning in terms of working together, collaboration, ownership. Strength came out stronger in our session. In the other session, we'll see shortly what their focus area was. But collaboration definitely underlines everything in terms of collective action. Next slide, please. We had 3 different presenters. The first is the National Business Initiative, who talked about an ethical leadership anti-corruption training, which is free on their portal. And it also has an assessment, a really worthwhile process for leaders to go through and see that they get training on best practices, decision-making, a very, very insightful program available to everybody. We can go to the next slide. We will share these details with you afterwards. It's just in the sake of, in the interest of time, that we are trying to keep it short and sweet. Next slide, please. So the second presenter focused on the Ethically Aware Supplier Induction Program, which is available from the Ethics Institute. This one is currently funded in Mozambique for implementation, but in South Africa we have a limited number of suppliers that can participate, so multinationals that can participate at no cost. It is a paid program, but it does focus a lot on building ethics awareness as well as ethics management within the supply chains of your multinational organizations, and it's based on the UNGC's principles. So it does speak to many of the most important elements in terms of business integrity, doing business in society, and representing you as a multinational or the organizations. It is also available in 3 languages, which helps being able to disseminate it throughout Africa. The last, you can go to the next slide, please. And then the last presenter is actually from Mozambique, where it's MOZUP, the Enterprise Development Center there, really focused on capacitating the suppliers to large companies in terms of the oil, gas, or extractive energies, but they're not just focused on that. They also look at other suppliers within the country that needs guidance, and all their training interventions actually focuses on a component of ethics and anti-corruption as the basis of part of their training. So the gaps that we have identified in our conversation is the awareness on the UNODC's business integrity portal. They've got excellent education opportunities there, also at no cost. Focus on the global integrity. And there's also a serious focus on the young professionals before they enter the market, which is really ideal as future leaders. There is also a gap still on the awareness of these different tools, maybe from one platform to others, so that we can go to one spot and really see what is out in the market without looking too much into trying to identify the different organizations that have training and tools available. Then another component that came up, and maybe someone does have a tool that we just didn't hear about today, is the training for entry-level employees and the onboarding for employees in organizations, and really looking at that element of business integrity training and capacity building and anti-corruption. And then also to create operational accountability standards in the emerging markets. And this was specifically looking at an enterprise development sort of platform. So that's it from our side. Over to you, Fatima.
Thank you. So in our breakout session, we looked at the certification mechanisms and tools that were available. In our session, thank you, we had a broad mix of representation from private sector, public sector, and international organizations. When asked, if you can move to the next, please. So as I mentioned, we had private sector, public sector, CSOs, and international organizations. When engaging around what does collective action mean, a lot of resonance with the discussion this morning, strongly coming out the issues around collaboration, working together, accountability, and common understanding. So a lot of, as well as the issues around advocacy. We had 3 presentations that were delivered to us around, the first was around the Ethics Officer Certification Program by the Ethics Institute, and that is focused on the individual, so the certification of ethics professionals. In addition, the Ethics Institute presented to us on Whistleblower House, and that is the support that is presented, that is offered to whistleblowers on a variety of mechanisms. So a lot of interest generated around those 2 offerings. The second presentation that we had was around Ethics First, and that really focuses on small businesses and how they can be active change agents, but also in addition a focus around the impact of the work that's being done around small businesses so that they can lead to an effective change in culture. And the third presentation that we then had was on the certification of the ISO 37001 standard, and that was very much a compliance-based process that is administered by an organization to other organizations where they're able to then get a certification around levels of compliance. We had a really interesting discussion that followed in terms of what are the gaps, and clearly the conversation felt that we're not short on anti-corruption tools. In fact, what we're short on is a demand for anti-corruption tools. And so before we create new tools, what we need to do is pause to better understand the market, what's out there in the country, in the region, in the sector, and avoid reinventing the wheel. The tools that are out there, there was a feeling that they focus a lot on compliance, and what we need to have is a systemic way of better measuring the ethical culture of the organization, the impact. Are we making a difference? And Ethics First shared some of the ways in which they're doing that. We also need to better understand, are these tools being utilized? Are they being implemented? Are we assessing the impact of the tools? And do we have impact stories to show the difference that these tools are making? Another important conversation that then happened in the breakout session was, how do we create demand for the tools that are already there? And the Ethics Institute shared how in the South African context, the Ethics Officer Certification Program was given legs through regulations. So for example, the Public Sector Integrity Management Framework requires professionals who will drive the ethics program, and that they be certified ethics officers. And similarly, job adverts in the private sector for ethics professionals require the certification. So that creates the demands. Also, what we needed, one of the discussions was the importance of showing top management how they'll benefit from the tools that are out there. And a conversation that then happened was, When you have bid documents, when you submit proposals, currently in the South African contracts, we look at the BBBE requirements and people are supposed to report on that. But are we looking at that from an anti-corruption tools perspective? Are we looking at it from anti-bribery requirements? How can we institutionalize those and thereby creating demand? And the last important point that then came out was around the absence of business coming on board. A lot of the discussion being around the need for business to be part of the collective action efforts and form part of the solution, and for business leadership to set the tone and for leaders to pronounce on the importance of these initiatives. I think that's pretty much what we covered in our breakout session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Celia and Fatima. It's great to hear about the discussions that have been ongoing. I think it's very interesting to hear the point about the question around demand, because we talk a lot to private sector, and I think there's also a problem of communication. I think having a common communication strategy which clearly identifies how these different tools interact and what are they offering sort of in totality in terms of engagement with the private sector. I think looking at least from the multinational perspective, very difficult when there's like in every region or country, there's many different ways and many different platforms. And then the question of, well, how would you as a multinational engage? Because we've had many group discussions at HQ with multinationals working internationally that have said if there's any way that we could have a standard, a certification that meant in terms of our due diligence processes, there was, that safety for us to do that, it would, be worth its weight in gold, essentially. So I think, of course, there's a lot of risks involved with that, and a question of who's certifying. It's a question of is it through a multi-stakeholder approach? That's why we call for collective action to do it, because this shouldn't just be a business opportunity. This should be something, that is developed by the right stakeholders. But I do think there's a question of how do we communicate that. I just want to. We already heard about quite a lot of the questions. I just wanted to check if there's any additional questions or comments about the tools that were presented, or any comments in terms of anything else that is going on in terms of things that are coming up that are being developed that people want to share. I just want to sort of open it up. If there is anything, just looking. Any comments? Yes, there's a comment there.
Yeah, just a quick one. I'm impressed with the work you're doing with ZPPA. I think there is another further discussion to that, which is looking at beyond just the process of contract award, the performance of those contracts. And I think in that ecosystem, if you like, it will be critical to actually see the publication of the actual contracts that are awarded and how the performance therein is done. I think the lessons from costs are quite informative. The law, I think, only limits to the process of awarding, but beyond that is where I think the detail is supposed to be given. Thank you. Otherwise, well done. We are happy actually to follow up on that. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there a question? Yeah, there's another question here on the left. Thank you.
Hi, I'm going to go back to the second panelist you had just now. With regards to the reporting tools where you upload the video and all those sort of things, I just want to sort of ask who's empowered to actually then respond to those reports? Or what is the anticipation in the development of that?
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? Okay. I'll answer first to the gentleman there. We are still in the development phase, and the stages that you are actually mentioning, we are actually wanting to implement them as well, because those are the ones whereby you end up having a tender that was awarded in 2009, come 10 years later, nothing has happened, right? So that's why we were saying that the picture side of it, we can then say this tender award, tender 205 of 09, there was supposed to be a school. A photo is uploaded. This is 2022. There is no school. Here is the ground. Yes. So on that one now, after having explained it to you like that, it now goes to the direction of. Then on that part now, we haven't yet concluded with the authorities like how should the reporting structure should be like. Should we first analyze that information before we send it to them, like on a weekly basis or on a monthly basis, or they want it directly when you then upload it, it goes directly. But then the issue of privacy was raised because in our group there are the lawyers, there are other people. With us, we're just wanting investigate, but then it comes now to the protection part. So that's where now, like, okay, if they are going to send directly, we now need to maybe remove the username, make it anonymous, no emails and stuff. So it's a very good, valid point, and we are actually working onto it. But the end result will be with the authorities what they want. When reporting, do they want it to come from us as just telling them this is what people are saying, or they want the individuals to be like? And then now, in that instance now, we now engage the legal side. Because with us, the legal side, we are not yet there yet. And also for now, we were actually working in having to have it live. If we first have the data, we start analyzing before people even start wanting to access it. We then now move on to the process of having to actually protect the person who has brought the information. Because at the end, you can have an app that people end up like, okay, we upload things, but we end up being victimized. So we also want to get to that part. But thank you very much, both of you, for your contributions, questions as well.
All right. I think we are going to wrap up now. So please, thank you very much for all the panelists. Thank you.